What if the Library of Alexandria never burned? Not burned, but became a living network of scrolls carried along rivers and coastlines by scribes who refused to let knowledge vanish. Picture a city where floodwaters slide past stone, where a cautious guild of custodians paddles across the harbor with bundles of waxed rolls strapped to oars, where knowledge is not confined to a hall but distributed like seeds across dozens of towns. This is the premise in this tiny alternate history, a scenario that keeps the flame of inquiry alive not in a single place but in a living map of hands and routes. In this world, the catastrophe that might have consumed cherished shelves never becomes a catastrophe for ideas. A flood sweeps through the harbor but spares the scribe's buoyant improvisations. The scrolls are saved by a chain of couriers who begin to ferry knowledge along the Nile, into the delta cities, up the Anatolian coast, across the sea lanes toward the Levant, and then inland along caravan trails, reaching into lands that will later become bustling centers of science. The library as a structure fractures into a system, more resilient, more fragile, more human. The scrolls ride with boatmen, merchants, and monks, tucked into reed baskets and leather satchels, passing from city to city like a living curriculum. The ripple effects are strange at first, and then relentlessly practical. Scholars in distant towns sit down to read the same diagrams, the same astronomical tables, the same medical recipes, though each adds marginal notes in their own hand. A seaman in a harbor might compare his navigational notes with a physician from a sun-baked caravan city. A mathematician in a hillside academy in a land of desert winds sees a scribble of symbols that belong to another culture, and suddenly the boundaries between Greece and Mesopotamia, between India and the Mediterranean world, start to blur. Over time, the archive becomes a distributed brain, a network rather than a temple. Without a single edifice to guard it, knowledge grows more supple, more contestable, more alive. This early web of texts changes the tempo of invention. No one can pretend there is a single spark that lights the fuse. Instead, there are many sparks. Observers, artisans, priests, and merchants carry back new ideas to their homes. And because the scrolls are physically diverse, the methods of practice begin to diverge. In one city, a scribal school tightens its grip on geometry, teaching precise measurement through a suite of instruments carved from bamboo and bone. In another, physicians borrow diagrams of the human body from a Greek treatise but layer them with Indian anatomical observations and Chinese pulse diagnostics, attempting to reconcile different models of how the body functions. The result is a medical tradition that might be less centralized but more flexible, capable of healing in climates and cultures far apart. In technology, the effect is subtler but real. The earliest machines of calculation travel with merchants, not as abstract ideals but as tangible tools carried by sailors who also know how to repair a sail and tune a compass. Knowledge of optics moves along with traders who barter spectacles and lens-making techniques, and solar tablets that chart the seasons are copied in urban workshop balconies across the coast. The first attempts at replicating texts are not constrained to a single printing press. Instead, a rough, communal approach to duplication emerges. People copy and annotate, create concordances, and exchange editions, turning the very act of copying into a step of invention in its own right. Cultural life adjusts to this diffusion. The arts become more polyphonic, with painterly schools drawing inspiration from forms circulating in multiple ports. The way a musician composes a melody mirrors the way a scribe composes a diagram, both seeking balance between structure and ornament. Stories travel along the same tides that carry recipes and alchemical experiments, becoming shared myths rather than isolated legends. Language evolves differently, braided by the frequent crossing of neighbors who always come bearing questions and answers in a dozen tongues. The idea of intellectual capital shifts too. If knowledge flourishes across many cities, power becomes more distributed and more precarious. Rulers who once derived legitimacy from a single seat of learning now compete to control networks of scribes, merchants, and temple scholars who collectively cradle the flame. Yet the world is not guaranteed gentle enlightenment. Without a centralized archive, there is no guaranteed republic of knowledge, no single institution to defend free inquiry against cynics or zealots. The abundance of copies invites disagreement. It also invites curation by different authorities who each insist their edition is the true copy of a living tradition. In this world, breakthroughs arrive not with a single dramatic moment, but as a chorus of small, persistent advances. Astronomy becomes a conversation across meridian lines. Chemistry grows from repeated experiments performed in kitchens, laboratories, and field tents. Biology softens its borders as natural history merges with medicine and agriculture. If this distributed library endures, the modern era would look less like a reawakening sparked by one invention and more like a mosaic formed by countless hands. The telescope might be a common scavenger tool in port cities. The calendar, a collage of observations made in altitudes and latitudes that cross-pollinate in real time rather than after years of translation. The internet could resemble a network of scrolls, each copy a thread that threads through dozens of hands, a living archive that refuses to be owned by any one institution. The question for our moment is not which new device would push humanity forward, but how a culture that treats knowledge as a shared itinerary rather than a guarded treasure navigates its journeys. As you watch, consider what your own town would save from the flood if your archives were scattered rather than centralized. What questions would your neighbors chase across a coastline of cities? What collaboration would you imagine when a diagram of a planet's motion lands in your workshop and finds a reader who can translate it into a tool? The tiny turning point here is not a blaze of genius, but a steady refusal to let a single room define the sum of human curiosity. With a distributed archive, curiosity grows into a collaboration that outlives empires. And perhaps that is the most radical surprise of all. That knowledge, when allowed to travel, can outpace power while still shaping it, guiding us toward a future we cannot yet name.